But I think what you're saying more is that instead of trying to change the world and therefore grasping at power, the ring of power, instead what we do is faithfully live out our lives in a community shaped probably by the Sermon on the Mount, shaped by the Beatitudes, shaped by a love for enemy and neighbor, and allow God to draw people to us, to draw people to Him, to draw people into this magnetic community. And I'm down with all that. I think all that's great. But when you start talking about, hey, Christians should just be over here and loving Jesus and following Jesus, the thing I can't figure out for myself, so I'm just going to ask you, maybe you've got it figured out, is where does justice come into play? Yeah. Because we I think as Christians, when I read the Old Testament prophets, we need to care about justice. We need to care about the weak and the vulnerable. And Jesus cared about the lepers, and He cared about those in prison. And the Old Testament prophets call us to care about economic justice and, of course, racial justice. And so once we start, so are we going to ignore those issues? Because once we start to get involved with them, then all of a sudden,
ignoring them.
I know, but
I'm not advocating for what is called quietism.
But let me just finish one thing, because I want to get your opinion on it.
Right.
Once we start going down that road of working for justice, then unfortunately, we get labeled Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive, whether it's for pro-life or pro-racial justice or, what all those are. We start getting labeled. So are you for sitting it out? You said no, you're not for quietism or sitting it out. But how do we stay out of the culture war?
For being a prophetic witness, I personally will not be involved in any kind of partisanship. And the political process itself, I'll be a witness. I will, in the name of Christ, in the light of Christ, ethics formed by the revelation of Christ, will talk about what I believe is faithful and what is true and what is just. But I'm just not interested in pursuing a political means of bringing this to pass. Others may. I simply won't do that. That's why, I've been invited to the National Prayer Breakfast for 30 years. I would never go.
Okay, I'm going to push on that.
I stay as far away from that as I can. Breakfast with Caesar strikes me as a bad idea every time.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is I don't trust myself.
So I'm with you.
You have to understand, Frodo. I would use the ring out of a motive to do good, but I know what it would do to me.
Right. If it can corrupt Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, I'm sure you too, and me too. So I'm with you. But let's go back to the civil rights movement. And right. Dr. King and others are marching, and it's a justice issue, but they're going to talk to Lyndon Johnson, and they're trying to pass legislation that became the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of the late 60s. Are you telling me that could we take you and put you back at that time, you fully formed now and all your beliefs, you would say, yeah, I can't be a part of those things because those are politics, and I stay out of politics.
I hope I would be a witness to that.
But you wouldn't get involved in the politics?
I could see myself marching. I could see myself wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt because I do.
Aren't those political? Or no? Do you see a difference?
I don't see it as political. I understand that others see it as political.
Fair enough.
And so that's a little bit different there. What I'm really stressing, though, is I personally, as a pastor, never want to be seen as becoming a
tool.
Yeah. Because neither side is going to, in my mind, represent what would embody faithfulness to Christ. But social issues. I've been pretty outspoken on some immigration things. And gun violence is, I spoke at a Moms Demand Action rally at our city hall, maybe 2 summers ago, something like that. And so I'm willing to be, but always in the name of Christ.
Okay.
And if others say, okay, well, that just seems like a Democrat to me, well, that's on them. That's not my base. That's not where I'm coming from. That's not what I'm attempting to do. So again, I understand that this is tricky. It isn't all, I think political theology is a razor's edge. It's that thin. And I never feel like I get it right.
Well,
but I
I'm glad
keep
to hear
trying.
that, because I
But
don't feel that
I
way
think
either.
political theology is the most, for me, it is the most difficult thing to get right, because I'm always trying to navigate those tricky waters of not being seduced into quietism and yet not becoming a political partisan. Um,
So let's go
so
back a little bit, because when I read your story, and I've read it a couple times, you once were what today would make you uncomfortable. In other words,
yeah, I mean,
what we're hearing
if
now is
somebody's
not where you
listening to
were.
this
You
and thinks,
changed.
oh, BZ's always been just kind of a left of center dude. No.
You changed over the years. You grew up in the area you live in now. Your dad was a
Yeah.
judge. You respected him a lot. You were what you now are uncomfortable with. So tell us, how did you change? What part of your life was that in, and what led to that change?
It was fairly dramatic. And it happened in 2000 for a lot of things. I mean, I look back on my life and I think everything happened in 2004, as far as just a spiritual crisis, resolution, breakthrough happened in that year. And I began to see the kingdom of Christ as something real. And I began to understand that America was just the latest in a long line of empires. Now, I'm using the word empire as a technical word, not as a pejorative. What I mean by empire, empires are rich, powerful nations who believe they have a divine right to rule other nations and a manifest destiny to shape history according to their own agenda. God loves nations. As I read my Bible, I see God loves the diversity, the language, culture, ethnicity of nations. What God is opposed to consistently, Genesis to Revelation, is empire. That is, these arrogant superpowers that think they have a right to rule the world. They have a manifest destiny to shape history, because what empires claim for themselves, God has promised to his son, Jesus. So there was this crucial moment. I don't tell this in Postcards from Babylon, although this story shows up in the book A Farewell to Mars, I believe. I was in it was 2004. I don't remember. That was Bush was running for re-election. Cheney was his vice president. There was a rally in St. Joseph. They asked me to offer the invocation at a rally that Cheney was going to be at. I didn't immediately say yes, but eventually I did say yes. And man, that was a mistake. And once I got there, I knew it was a mistake. And I knew I was just being used as a tool. I was backstage, I meet Dick Cheney, whatever. Then I'm brought out, trotted out. I mean, I understood what was happening. Okay, I'm here as the pastor of the largest church in the city to
Rally votes.
tacitly indicate that God is on the side of the Republican Party. And I sat there on that platform, beginning to perceive, because this was 18 years ago. And I was just waking up to what was happening. And it came time for me to pray. And I had a prayer written out. I went to the podium, didn't pray that prayer, just kind of bowed my head. I was silent for a while. And I know they were thinking, come on, Zahnd, get on with it. Let's move it here. And I was praying silently, saying, Lord, forgive me for even being here. I'll never do this again. And then I prayed a very innocuous, sort of vague prayer, and literally walked off the stage. I wasn't supposed to do that. I just walked out of the building, got in my car, and left, and thought, I am never going to do that again. I'm just going to stay as far away as that I can. Now, I've written books and I talk about this now, and I have a very established position, more or less, about, the role of the church. But this was 18 years ago. And remember, I'm just a Jesus freak, charismatic, I was just along for I encountered Christ as a teenager, leading the church, pastoring a church by the time I'm 22. And we were initially, the Jesus movement, charismatic movement was really completely apolitical. It began to change in the 1980s. with Jerry Falwell, with Pat Robertson, and that bunch. And I just sort of went along for the ride until in midlife I woke up and thought, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to be faithful to my Lord. I'm going to be a witness for Christ. I'm not going to be reduced, to just, serving as a religious consultant for a political party. I'm just not going to do it.
When you made those changes, when you walked off that stage, and I think that if I hear you right, that's kind of emblematic of a larger shift.
It was literal and metaphoric at the same time.
Right. It signifies some bigger transitions in your thinking, your theology, your heart, the whole thing. But when you walked off that stage and made these changes, did it cost you some friends? Did it cost you at church? What were the costs?
It cost me 1,000 people.
Wow.
I mean,
immediately just walked out?
No. Over a period of several years. It wasn't particularly that incident was probably not perceived as significant as it was for me.
But the big change
it was
cost
as
you.
I in my sermons, in my preaching, teaching, leading, as I began to challenge the idea that there was some sort of easy, nice, comfortable relationship between the interests of the kingdom of Christ and the American agenda. And as I began to be critical of the religious right and of waging war as being incompatible with Christian ethics, that's what I mean. There were other changes I was making during that time, but I don't think that really would know. I could have brought people along. That was the big issue. And what's interesting, I'm sure glad that we made those moves in 2004, 5, 6, 7. It seemed very hard then. And I thought, I'm doing this at the worst time. Well, today it's amplified tenfold. And so I really have sympathy, deep compassion for the pastor who is trying to make the kinds of changes today that I began making 18 years ago, because it's just so much more toxic, angry, polarized, volatile.
When you lost those 1,000 people, just curious, did others come back? Did they come back or others come back? Or was this a permanent change in the structure of the church?
Very few came back, hardly any. And I want to say, you've already alluded, I'm in a town of 70-some thousand people is the official population.
1,000's a lot of people.
Well, what it means is if you go anywhere, you see them.
Absolutely.
You go to the grocery store, you see them. And these were not, just nameless masses for us.
These were your friends.
These are people that I had maybe led to the Lord, baptized, married, baptized their kids, married their kids. Uh-huh. And they were leaving saying, Brian's backslidden, which if anything, I felt like I front slidden. I felt like I was being more faithful to Christ than ever, but it was costing me. Here is, though, the phenomenon that you might find interesting. And we had this actually quite a bit. We had, I was doing this mostly, I was 45 and, I was late 40s into my 50s when this was happening. And we had the phenomenon of people my age or maybe a little older leaving and their adult children staying, saying, Mom and Dad, you can leave if you want, but we're not leaving, because it's a church like this actually that is keeping us in the faith.
Because some of this is generational, right? I mean, it's not completely generational.
I know it's been talked about, but the alignment of American evangelicals, white evangelicals, older white evangelicals, with the Republican Party as manifest in Donald Trump has led to a mass exodus of people under 40, people in their 30s, people in their 20s. They are repulsed by it, and rightly so. They want to have nothing to do with it. Again, I'm speaking frankly here, aren't I? So you think of Franklin Graham, son of Billy Graham. Billy Graham, maybe the most, famous evangelist in American history. And then Franklin, his, son, who would want to be known as an evangelist for Christ. And yet among a younger generation, he would be among the most influential in moving people out of the church and out of Christianity. He's that kind of posture of just being a apologist for Donald Trump drives younger people not only out of the church, but sometimes, very often, right out of Christian faith.
But isn't, like, Franklin Graham is a great example because he seems like a mixed bag. In other words, he has been very partisan and loyal to former President Trump. At the same time, he leads an organization that has made real differences overseas in the vulnerable and the poor. And it kind of shows that
we've worked with him. You know, Word of Life Church, we've done a lot with Samaritan's Purse.
We have too. And so it shows that everybody's kind of a mixed bag and nobody's all bad or all good. And I'm wondering if your history, your personal history of once being what you are now uncomfortable with, gives you empathy for people who are where you are, or even like somebody like Franklin Graham.
I have, yes. Yeah. I mean, the average person in the pew just trying to make it through life and trying to follow Jesus. I'm not interested in trying to, in any way, reprove them, rebuke them for getting their Christian faith tangled up with Republican politics. That being said, with leaders, I have a completely, again, I'm going to give you a Lord of the Rings line. A wizard should know better. and leaders, on the other hand, they should know better. And so my gentleness towards the sheep is not the same as towards the shepherds. And I can be fairly harsh with those who I think are simply making a bid for power and betraying fidelity to Christ for the sake of, being close to the halls of power. I think that's reprehensible.